Welcome, everyone. We are grateful to have you all joining us today as we honor National Child Day, which is today. It's also International Child Day, but it's also here in Canada, it's also National Child Day. And so today we are going to be having this special panel where we will have an opportunity to hear all of our children's voices as part of reflecting on the One Chance to Be a Child report. And we are grateful for all of you who are joining us today. Let us begin first with a land acknowledgement. If you have a window, feel free to look outside. If not, take a moment. I invite you to close your eyes and perhaps call to mind a part of this beautiful unceded territory where we get to be, Mi'kmaq. If there's perhaps a beach or a hiking trail, or maybe it's your backyard or a park, but somewhere where you feel really connected to the land, and just take a moment to close your eyes and feel that gratitude for where you are, where we all are. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Unama'ki, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. So let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work, study, and play. Ulalu. Thank you all. And we are all treaty people. So what this means is we have to take this moment to begin to reflect on how this impacts what we do and how we do it. And how does it guide our work together today? Decolonizing ourselves in our practice means recognizing the ways in which we are each impacted by the colonial system in which we all participate, and from which those of us of settler descent continue to benefit. Each of us, depending on our social location and intersectional positionality, are uniquely oppressed. For example, those of us from African descent were dispossessed and uprooted from their land and brought to Turtle Island against their will. So we take this moment to reflect upon the unique impact of colonization upon each of us and upon the ways that we think and act in this world. And let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. And let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways that colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. Ulalu. And when we acknowledge the land, we must also begin to acknowledge the wisdom of this planet and align ourselves with its truths. This quote, which is the start of the One Chance to Be a Child report, comes from the Progress of Nations. The day will come when nations will be judged not by their military or economic strength, nor by the splendor of their capital cities and public buildings, but by the well-being of their peoples, by their levels of health, nutrition, and education, by their opportunities to earn a fair reward for their labors, by their ability to participate in decisions that affect their lives, by the respect that is shown for their civil and political liberties, by the provision that is made for those who are vulnerable and disadvantaged, and by the protection that is afforded to the growing minds and bodies of their children. And so with that, we are grateful to begin this special panel. I am Naj from the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, and I am grateful to be here with all of you and recording this onto our YouTube channel so that we can continue to share this conversation long after it is over physically. The impact of our conversation may it continue to shape the future of all of our kids. And I want to welcome our first speaker, Stacie Smith, who completed an undergraduate degree in kinesiology from Dalhousie University and a professional degree in education from the University of New Brunswick, and who is pursuing her master's in arts and education at Mount St. Vincent University. Recently, she was a co-chair of the Youth Advisory Council of the Youth Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Services Review, conducted by the New Brunswick Child and Youth Advocates Office. She is also the founder of the Mental Health Student Support Network, a groundbreaker with FRAME, a co-lead of the Mental Health International Youth Advisory Committee, and co-executive director of the Young Canadians Roundtable on Health. She currently works as the youth programs lead at the YWCA in Halifax. And with that, I'm going to introduce her.
Great, thank you so much, Naj. Hi, everybody. Great to see you all here this morning, and hello to our virtual participants as well. So, like Naj mentioned, my name is Stacie. I'm excited to be moderating this wonderful group of youth and adult panelists today. Our event today will begin with a panel of youth and adults who will be discussing key youth-identified issues that they themselves face every day. The young people provide us all context and information on their lived realities. Following that, our adult panels will connect these lived experiences to research, policy, or practice from their professional experiences. Most Lean, a social work student, will then provide us an update on accessing language-appropriate services within Nova Scotia. We will then open the floor for the youth to ask pressing questions to the adults. Finally, we will make space for both virtual and in-person attendees to ask questions to any of our presenters from today. So I'll be starting off by introducing our wonderful youth panelists. Starting off with Luther. Luther uses he, him pronouns and is a grade 12 student enrolled in Middleton Regional High School. Luther runs the school's GSA, Gender Sexuality Alliance. Luther has lots of experience in the social activism scene as well as social justice. He's been working for DAL before for the One Chance to Be a Child report and also works on a research team at Acadia. He's a student who is neurodivergent and always striving to obtain a higher education and always striving to help change our world for the better so we can all live without fear because we are all people and should be treated as such. Great to have you here, Luther. We also have Graham, who is here, who's joining us online. He's a 19-year-old trans man from Nova Scotia and also of Jewish and African-American descent. He's been involved in various activism and social justice projects since he was young and has always been encouraged to speak up and use their privilege as a white passing individual to create space for the more marginalized and vulnerable individuals in their community. They believe with enough voices, we can build a world where individuals can be comfortable and safe to be themselves. A few ways that they've helped create this space in the past have included being a part of organizing a queer and BIPOC-friendly youth group at their family's cafe, The Biscuit Eater in Mahone Bay, They were also involved in the Genuine Progress Index Atlantic Climate Action events through 2019 and 2020. And most recently, they were a part of a panel with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers that focused on trans experience in Nova Scotian schools. Great to have you today, Graham. And our final youth participant is Zofia. Zofia uses her pronouns and is a grade 11 student who is passionate about equity. She's been heavily involved in striving for justice across many different issues, including joining committees to end the sexism of dress codes, working within her school to speak out against bigotry, and organizing community rallies in support of gender justice. Zofia is inspired by her Muslim faith, which teaches that when you see an injustice, you should change it with your actions, or at least with your words, or at least within your heart, though that is the weakest level of faith. She hopes that her actions can help create a better world for all. Great to have you here today, Zofia. So to start us off, Graham's actually going to be our first presenter online. So I will hand it over to Graham.
Alrighty, good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Graham. I'll be talking about different requirements of queer youth in Nova Scotia. We know that the importance of stability and safety for developing youth is extremely important, and queer youth and BIPOC youth, as well as those of Jewish or different cultural descent, have difficulty accessing this support and safety. There are various resources that would be very, very important for us to have access to, such as primarily visibility, safe support systems within our communities that we can see and are there to provide support. Within schools, it's also incredibly important to have safety and support, because that, for a lot of people, is their primary safe space. It's the place where they can go to be themselves. It's important to show them and us that we are welcome to explore who we are and grow into our best versions of ourselves. It's important to have that strong foundation, as today's youth are our future. It's important to set us up for success. It's also important to know that knowledge and information can't be forced onto people. You can't force people to accept others, and learning how to kind of create our own safe spaces and find safe peers who we can create our own little found families with is extremely important. Feel a sense of belonging. Allowing students to have that sense of kind of family within their communities, and know that they are seen and heard and welcome to find who they are, essentially. And it's important to know where we can find resources as well, how we can access that and get the support that's needed, such as mental health, health aid, and physical health aid as well for gender divergent individuals. Those are the main points that I have there.
Great, thank you so much, Graham. Very well said.
Thank you.
Definitely the safe spaces was something I resonated with as someone that works in the community with youth and has seen specifically what's happening in New Brunswick with the changes to policy 713, that right now isn't existing in that province. So hopefully what we're seeing there won't kind of come any closer to where we are right now. But great, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Luther, who's going to be chatting a little bit about mental health.
I'm obviously going to talk about mental health here, but that's quite the umbrella term that we're looking at here. And kind of what goes with mental health a lot is addiction. So I'm also going to kind of touch on addictions and talk about that. I think it's important to talk about what we're doing well. That is definitely a very important aspect of what we're doing today, but I tend to put more of an emphasis on kind of what we could be doing better. So I can kind of give you a bit of a story here. I have gone through 5-6 different schools through my kind of school career here. I'm in grade 12, like we had previously mentioned. I have taken one course that touched on mental health, a singular course. And that course was an elective. It wasn't required. It was one I chose to take, and that's psychology, of course, right? And I think a big part of the mental health problem we're seeing in schools and within youth coming out of schools is that we're not kind of educated about it. We don't talk about it because it's a taboo subject, it's a taboo topic, and it's not seen as real, quote unquote, right? Whereas physical disabilities and physical health is seen as more real, but even then that's not always the case because people aren't always nice. So I think a big problem that we're seeing today is a lot of education and a lot of that knowledge piece and that the fact that we're not passing on knowledge. I also think that a big part about substance abuse and mental health is, as a student, I see it a lot, peer pressure. We've probably heard that quite a bit. But because of the social climate inside schools right now, we're seeing a lot of people saying come on, come drink. It's what teenagers do, right? It's the normal thing teenagers do. And, I think that's perpetuated from the lack of mental health support. But it's also just how we've grown up and how we've learned to socialize. And I think the reason we learn to socialize like that is not only from our parents, because that's how they socialized, because they didn't have the internet, so they connected over a social construct, drinking. But it's also just because we are drawn to it because it has been used so long and so effectively without regard for mental health. What we are doing well, though, is we are getting better. There has been a steady, so I looked at statistics because I like statistics. There has been a very steady decline in mental health issues within youth, but just because there's a decline doesn't mean it's good. We've come from a decline from people being 11 to 14 having suicide as their second highest cause of death. That's where we're coming down from. But that doesn't make it good. That makes it progress. And I think looking at that progress is a reason to keep making progress and not an excuse to stop making progress, which it can be used as sometimes, right? Mental health is a constant battle, and we as youth and we as adults need to keep fighting that battle, because if we stop, then it's only going to get worse, and it's already not great. Yeah, mental health, it's important, right? A lot to talk about. That's about it for me, really. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Luther. And again, I can also resonate with mental health. That's been the primary focus of my work for the last few years. And I really know that it's not in the curriculums as something that's required. It's all electives. And this knowledge is so, so important, not only now, but in the future. So definitely really, really glad that you brought that up. So great, thank you so much. And our last youth, Sophia, going to be talking about microaggressions.
Welcome to Canada. So where are you from? No. Where are you really from? Where are your parents from? Aren't you hot in that? How long is your hair? And why do you wear that? These are all microaggressions that I face on a pretty regular basis. I hear them so often, in fact, that my mom and I have joked about making a microaggressions coffee card. After 10, "No, where are you really from?" we treat ourselves to Tim Hortons in true Canadian spirit. So, what is a microaggression exactly? Well, Wikipedia, that go-to resource, defines microaggressions as a term used for commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. All right, wondering where I'm from doesn't make you a bad person, and welcoming me to Canada certainly doesn't make you a bigot. However, these comments have underlying othering messages to them, and the persistence of comments like these are tiring and frustrating for minoritized youth who hear them on a constant basis. They can be hard to address because, of course, the person who's making the comment sees that as a one-off. They don't realize how tiring it is to have to continually address well-meaning but intrusive questions. The individual asking the question generally doesn't intend to cause harm, but persistent comments and intrusive questions that start as simple annoyance but grow into something really hurtful. All minoritized youth have to deal with microaggressions, and we hear them everywhere, from complete strangers to staff members at school to really close friends. It's not something we can ever get away from. And the problem with these comments is that it's fundamentally othering. Although asking where I'm from isn't rude, it's invasive, but it's not impolite. The message it sends is that I, and other identifiably Muslim youth, can never be truly Canadian. We will perpetually be on the outside and not accepted into this culture. So for this presentation, I researched microaggressions against communities that I'm not a part of, because it's something that affects all minoritized youth, and I wouldn't feel right restricting it only to my own group. So I've spent a lot of time outlining what I go through. Many racial minorities, for example, are told that they aren't like others of their race. Usually these microaggressions take the form of complimenting the person for some perceived superiority to stereotypes about their race. Biracial people may hear microaggressions in the form of comments that they aren't really a part of whatever race they don't noticeably most resemble. Disabled people are often called inspirational, which seems like it should be a positive, but it's still othering. Or if their disability isn't visible, are implied that it's not actually present at all. It also suggests that disability is such a burden that simply living one's life is extremely brave. So it's hard to stand up against microaggressions precisely because they are micro, very, very small. They're not obvious, dramatic incidents of outright bigotry, but rather subtle, pervasive, and persistent cumulative acts of othering. So given all that, how do we deal with this issue? It's a manifestation of a societal problem, and societal problems aren't something that we as individuals can hope to overcome. What can one person do? Well, we need to take action as individuals. None of us can do everything, but all of us can do something. Educating yourself is key. If you work with minoritized youth, you need to start by educating yourself about the prejudice that minorities you work with are facing. Be informed and aware. Catch yourself when you slip up, or at least be humble and open to learning when someone else points out to you that you slipped up, because you will. After you've identified the prejudice they face and your own prejudice, you can start trying to fix it. If you're working with a Muslim student, make time for them to pray throughout the day. Make sure that when you order pizza, it doesn't have pork. The number of times I've had to eat a granola bar at class parties or sleepovers because people forgot that pepperoni and bacon is pork It's really, really depressing. And there's such a simple solution. I like to call them micro-positives. It's the exact opposite of microaggressions. Small, consistent, welcoming comments. Research holidays, wear pride pins, follow content creators who don't share your background, respond to tragedies with empathy. When you hear stereotyping comments, speak out against it. The last one is really, really important. Whether or not you're with minoritized youth, you must speak out, even or maybe especially when the only people you're with assume you'll agree with their bigoted comments. Make sure you're not in a bubble of only being invested in your own issues and awareness. Educate yourself and be open to asking questions, and do not always ask minoritized people to take the responsibility to educate you. In the same way that microaggressions accumulate and make minorities feel unwelcome by their friends and society as a whole, micropositives helps reverse that feeling by making us feel welcomed and accepted by the broader society. We referenced this a little bit at the start, but there's a teaching in my faith that when you see an injustice, you must change it with your actions. And if you're not able to do that, you should at least change it with your words. And if you're still not able to do that, then at least change it within your own heart, although that is the lowest form of faith. Systemic prejudice puts obstacles in people's way. The system is not broken. It is designed to be white supremacist, capitalist, and patriarchal. In the face of all that, we have to take deliberate, intentional action, not just to not cause harm, but to actively work to undo harm. We have to take action. If we can't take direct action to dismantle the oppressive systems, we at least have to speak out against them. And if we're not there yet, we need to start changing our hearts by educating and informing ourselves of where change needs to take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sophia. That was very powerful, and I think the biggest takeaway is we're never going to stop learning and always need to keep ourselves informed. So thank you so much. So now we're actually going to move on to our adult presenters. So I'm going to provide some introductions for those folks first. So online we have Carmel joining us from the Youth Project. They are the Executive Director and Support Advocacy Coordinator. As the Support and Advocacy Coordinator, they provide resources, referrals, and supportive counseling to youth and families. They also collaborate and organize with local initiatives, artist-run centers, and community partners with an aim to create wider 2SQT, BI, POC community and support systems within the HRM. They are also an experimental violinist, noisemaker, deep Leo, lover of miniature pastries, I can relate to that, art maker, and avid bookworm. Great to have you here today, Carmel. All right, and up next, and apologies if I say your first name wrong, Matthias Gay? Matthias, my apologies. Matthias Gay is here as a registered nurse by training with a background in acute mental health, inpatient and emergency settings. He's been with the IWK since 2020 and currently in the role of clinical leader of operations. Their interest in area of research is suicidology and indirect markers of short-term risk. Great to have you here today. And we also have Hannah Rashid, a graduate of the Master of Social Work program from Dalhousie University. She also has a master's in educational psychology with a concentration in educational psychology from Mount St. Vincent University. She recently just came back to Nova Scotia and is the Director of Social Services. Again, apologies if I pronounce this wrong, Uma Masjid. So great to have you here today. And finally, we also have Moseline here, a dedicated social work student pursuing a bachelor's degree in social work at University de Saint Anne. They are a Cameroonian and have always been driven by a deep sense of compassion and a desire to help those in need. Throughout their academic journey, they've consistently demonstrated a strong commitment to social justice and community well-being. They're actively engaged in internships and volunteer work, focusing on issues like child welfare and mental health advocacy. Their long-term goal is to become a licensed clinical social worker, providing support and guidance to vulnerable populations while advocating for social change and equality. It's great to have you here today. So we're gonna head over to Zoom and hear from Carmel to start things off.
Hi, folks. I'm so happy to be here. I really appreciate all of the incredible youth voice that I've heard and witnessed already. So what I'm here to add is perspective around, of course, uplifting the 2S LGBTQIA+ youth voice that I have the privilege of working with across the province. And so I'm going to start by acknowledging that it is also the Trans Day of Remembrance today, a day that was founded in 1999 by a small group of trans women who were driven to organize due to the death of 2 Black trans women in their community. One of the founders, Gwendolyn Ann Smith, talks about TDOR as a space and a day to highlight the losses that we've faced due to anti-transgender bigotry and violence. But she also talks about the vitality and importance in celebrating folks that are doing incredible work within their communities to ensure that trans people have access to justice. And so today is a big day as we think about the ways that we can continue to create space for young people in our lives, as well as advance space and safety for Two-Spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming communities of all ages. And within kind of that structure, I'm going to be speaking specifically about the ways in which currently, as Graham already spoke to really brilliantly, realities of anti-queer and anti-trans legislation across the country and within the US are impacting young populations in huge ways. And so there are some really beautiful elements of having a lot of access to trans representation, which is something that is new and newer for youth populations locally and beyond. There are trans, gender nonconforming, and Two-Spirit folks in positions of power, represented in media, in new ways every single day. And with that comes a beautiful context of self-actualization and understanding, but also comes with a heavy burden of having to navigate often a role of advocacy, advocate, in systems navigation, and also educator to adults in their lives. And so we see a lot of young people really struggling with the complicatedness of finding out who they are and trying to self-actualize, as well as having time to experience joy and be a child. Met with the realities of adults in their lives, not understanding what they are navigating, what they're going through, and how they need support in realities of their identity. There are so many barriers for Two-Spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming youth and children. Some are bureaucratic, including the expensive and long process in legal name change. Some are medical, in a very long and barrier-heavy process in accessing gender-affirming healthcare, which sees trans healthcare unfortunately as a specialty, when really that should be an element of healthcare that every practitioner is aware of and able to offer to their clients, as well as social and emotional. So the navigation of potentially coming out by choice within a school setting or being outed in a school setting that has impacted their ability to connect with their peers, make friends, and engage in their studies in a way that they would like, as they are in, again, that position of self-advocate, educator, and de-escalator among and within their peer group. So in that context, it's really important to think about the pressures and stresses that puts on a young person's mind and body. And a huge part of my job is supporting young people in that navigation, whether that's the social navigation or the logistics navigation or healthcare navigation, but also really ensuring that those young people have access to joy and to play, to interrupt some of the parentification and intensity put on young people's minds and bodies, and kind of the pressure for them to grow up really fast. And so my work is, I think, equal parts disruption of transphobia within the context of systems that we understand, as well as carving space for access to queer and trans joy. And those pieces feel equally or equitably important in my work. And I think through the context of support, some of the things that I will say are really effective are representation. And as simple as that sounds, there are so many young people that I talk to that don't see themselves represented within their school spaces, within their curriculum, or feel nervous to talk about that lack of representation within their classroom spaces and school ecosystems. And so having access to supportive adults who can come to those school spaces and support them in learning more about queer and trans history, in understanding the correlation between context of social justice and liberation movements across the country and how that intersects with queer and trans issues. These are really critical parts of young people's development, and they should have access to those pieces and shouldn't have to fight for them or advocate for them themselves. And also it is active harm reduction for young queer and trans youth across the province to see aging two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming adults in their lives. And as my really brilliant coworker, Chris Cochran says or jokes about, seeing two-spirit, trans, and gender nonconforming people as middle management, not just people who are being recognized as celebrity, but people who are living day-to-day lives and allowed to just exist within their context of self without having to be remarkable every single moment of every single day and forced into kind of a role of forever advocate. So that representation piece is so crucial and so critical. That play and joy piece is so crucial and so critical. The supportive adult in understanding the network of navigation for a young person through a medical and or administrative context is so critical and so crucial. And of course, supporting young people and supporting their peers is another huge piece. So ensuring that young people have space to make connection and to forge relationships and meet each other across the province is another role of harm reduction within our work, and a really effective role. So allowing for young people to make connection in ways that they might not otherwise. So collaborating across schools, across communities, so that young people can create a really hearty and widespread network of folks of similar experience, so they feel less isolation, which is an active, again, role in reducing harm around realities of suicidality and self-harm. And so having access to people who are going through what you're going through is, of course, a critical element of collective and self-care in our communities. And then maybe the last thing that I'll say in this work, it's deeply critical to see and hold an intersectional perspective. And so finding ways to talk to young people about intersecting realities of liberation movements locally and across the globe are ways that we can have full conversations around allyship and solidarity, and have necessary conversations around how Indigenous sovereignty is a queer and trans issue at its root. The self-determination and land of Palestinian young people is, of course, a queer and trans issue. Having access to conversations around disability justice and liberation movements that are rooted around supporting folks to create the most accessible world possible. That is a queer and trans issue. So having education readily available for young people to support them in creating these links not only allows them to further understand their complex and beautiful and myriad identities, but connect with other youth who have similar struggle or similar contexts and create and build the kind of communities that we know that we deserve. So with all of those pieces, I hope we can think about connecting youth and holding kind of like threads of shared experience to allow for youth to connect and play and change the world in the beautiful ways that I know that they can. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for those powerful words, and we appreciate all the amazing work you do across Nova Scotia. I'm probably going to butcher this again. Matthias, you're up next.
Hello? Oh, okay, that's a little bit loud. So maybe I'll stand up because I have issues sitting down, if that's okay with you guys. And if I go past the 5 minutes, somebody cut me off because I could probably talk until the sun goes down. First and foremost, thank you for having me here, and as well for the youth for speaking.
There you go. I just wanted to make sure we can
very
see
loud?
you. No, you're perfect and beautiful. I just want to make sure we can see you because you're.
Which way?
Stay. You're perfect.
Camera's back there. Okay, sorry.
You're
Part
good.
of the half. What? So I see you guys through there. Okay. Yes, it's really important, I think, for the youth to be here, not only for the other youth to make the examples you guys are talking about to create representation, but I think for adults in places of position, it's incredibly important because I think a struggle of youth and having been a teenager in those places is we don't get taken very seriously, right? It's like we have a lot of idealism, but the adults always say, you don't have a lot of experience, so wait till you get there. And, I think we can always start. There is not an age that's young enough where we can start doing work that means something to us. So thank you guys for being here. I'll try and keep the topic light because my area of focus is suicidology, but I particularly want to focus on the aspect of belonging, and particularly when it comes to youth mental health. My focus is on a narrative crisis model that looks at the development of self-injurious behaviors by creating a narrative in which those behaviors seem like the best situation in hand. And the part that I want to focus on is two aspects. One is of burdensomeness or perceived burden, and the other aspect is perceived or lack of belonging in a situation. So part of this is based on identity narrative theory, which came out around the year 2000, which basically says that we create a sense of the world and how we by how we modify these stories and how we interact with other people in the world. And depending on how we interpret those stories, we're either going to have, hope and potential for better things in life, or we're going to start seeing that disappointment, failure, negative thoughts of ourselves start becoming the pattern at that. So once we start creating those patterns, usually by stressor, a lack of support, trauma, that typically the biggest a trigger for that, you start thinking about yourself as a good human, as a bad human. So the first aspect is the burden aspect, and it's how good do you feel about yourself. And I think that most youth that come upon puberty start feeling typically really self-critical about themselves, and we start comparing ourselves to those peers around us. The other aspect that happens as well is that we start detaching ourselves from our family values, and we start trying to identify our own values. So it's the perfect storm when you really think about it, because you're trying to come up into your own shoes, and you're trying to say, look, I want to try and do this for my own, and you're also trying to fit in with a new group, and you're trying to make a place for yourself in this world by identifying with that. But if maybe if my parents are transphobic, for example, and I don't feel safe with that, I'm not going to feel very comfortable with myself when stepping into the situation. So I'm already stepping into making friends and into identifying with myself as, what, I'm actually a burden to other people, and I'm actually costing people, more hassle than they need to in the situation. So then the next step when we start feeling like a bad person for ourselves is that we start questioning our belonging. And I really want to touch on that, particularly with the New Brunswick law that got brought back in, because belonging is actually one of the last facets in this narrative theory, which can actually protect individuals and youth from self-harm in the future. So you can have high levels of burden, you can have a really bad environment, but if you're able to find that belonging and connection, you can actually be protected for that, which highlights the dangers of the laws with something like New Brunswick, because if that was the only place for somebody to be in there, you don't have that safe place, and then you're stuck with just dealing with it yourself. And now you start to question, where do you fit into society? And those are some of my interests and where I think we need to be doing better with youth. I'll take this quote from a very good couples therapist who said, Matthias, it's not about showing up, because most of us show up. It's about how we show up. you know, and for the youth, it's about creating that environment to, you know, letting them know that sometimes we're not looking to fix anything, you know, sometimes we're just looking to be there for them and letting them know that they have somebody in there for them, letting them know that they have a place in this world in there. And I hope that if there's anything I leave with you guys in here is that, you know, not showing up is not an option because that will cause harm. So transphobia, let me put it out there, that is causing harm to the youth. And statistically speaking, it's harm that when a youth is rejected, whether it's from the coming out through sexuality or their gender, from their family, that risk, not only are they at risk to attempt self-injury, but that's sustained into adulthood. That's a core memory that we've now created, and it's a big aspect that they'll have to go through. So please, you know, I know that we don't do a lot to educate parents in that enough. So I think we could do more within that regard. But number one, you have to show up. Number two, when you show up, create that safe environment. You know, like kids are not looking for you to tell them what's going to be cool to wear or, you know, what you think of their pronouns. To be completely fair, that is their story and their narrative to create. And what we find is that the more that people want to create that narrative for them, the more confusion that can make. And what some of the research has stated is that when individuals find that conflict and when they're not able to derive that narrative, they actually feel lost in the world. So now when I get a stressor, I'm not able to rely on my experience thinking that I could actually overcome these situations. And instead, I rely on my environment because I'm told that other people around us should be the one that could be helping us in here. And unfortunately, when we get into those modes, we become hypersensitive and even more vulnerable to be rejected by individuals. So that is the perfect combination at that point as well, where now not only do we create a risk, but we're not supporting it in that regard as well. And I said I wasn't going to go into a tangent, but I went into a little less of a tangent. But yes, please help your children belong, be there for them.
Thank you so much for that powerful and just energetic speech, in my opinion. I'm glad you brought up New Brunswick again. I feel like that's been a really big topic of conversation with that policy. I've been doing a lot of work in school on that. So like I said, I'm really hoping that something changes with that. And again, nothing like that will happen here, but it could, unfortunately. Next up, we're gonna hear from Hannah.
Thank you. Peace and blessings, everyone. I think the theme of belonging was what I was going to go with, so I'll pick it up from the last speaker. And of course, Graham started that off. And I'm speaking to the microaggressions piece, but I wanted to connect it again to the sense of belonging. So you get a great overview about this. And we talk about it when we're supporting anyone, because that's what connects us. And I have notes just to keep on track. I'm wondering about time, Stacie. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. Oh, so much time. Thank you. Okay, I'll try to be impactful with my 5 minutes. So the highlight is belonging is all about being seen, accepted, and supported by others and doing the same for them. It's built over time with people who are supportive of us as full, authentic human beings. We get it, right? This is a hardwired piece of us. It goes so back that, you know, if you believe in the cave people, it kept them alive because when they faced any kind of adversity or they were struggling, when they were in their groups, the groups helped them to find food or to fight off the adversity. So, you know, this is how they went on to live and to have children and to just basically go on. So it's really at the core. The core of belonging is not something new. We just have started using this word a lot more because there's research now to back it up, but it goes way back to our, you know, very essence. So how does this all connect to racism and microaggressions? You know, we've had a wonderful definition from Sophia, so I'm not going to repeat that. But as a person who's, I don't know, I don't want to give away my age, but had a lifelong experience of so many things. And if I could count how many times I've been asked, where am I from? I don't know what I would have. I would have amazing, I wish, stories to tell you about how that made me feel, or the fact that people even commented that I could speak very good English. So, you know, this is something that people think in their well-being that they're being kind, but not understanding the impact that it has with a person over time. So in a nutshell, microaggressions attack an individual at their core individual level. The effect of repeated microaggressions can lead to heightened stress levels, emotional distress, feelings of frustration, anger, sadness, confusion, self-esteem. I mean, I could go on and on. There's so much here. And the thing that protects a person, of course, is those protective factors, which I'll get to. But if we don't have them, the ongoing impact of microaggressions is that it's an unsafe environment. And there's a feeling of isolation and devaluation of the individual. I like to quote Brené Brown here. As a social worker, we always quote Brené Brown. What is it with that? A deep sense of love and belonging is an irreducible need of all people. We are biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. When those needs are not met, we don't function as we were meant to. We break, we fall apart, we numb, we ache, we hurt others, we get sick. So that sums up what happens when that sense of belonging is taken away. There's a lot more I could speak to, but I'm going to wrap it up there because I want to leave the option for questions.
Great, thank you so much, Hannah. That was great. And last but not least, we're going to hear from Moseline. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Moseline. And then today I'm going to talk about my first internship that was in a CSAP school with School Plus. I'm going to talk about the factors that affect the youth that I've noticed over there. So my first internship was with School Plus. What is School Plus? School Plus is an integrated services delivery model for children, youth, and their families. I aim to know its objects, its points of intervention, and the people with whom they work, familiarize myself with the different intervention models, with the practical part of the intervention, and be able to link the theoretical and practical learning during my intervention times. During my internship, I had the opportunity to experience several school activities and attend various meetings of several social workers from Nova Scotia and other regions. Upon this, I discovered several interrelated factors that have a profound impact in the lives of youth, the youth in Nova Scotia, affecting their education and well-being. In this exploration, we will delve into the multi-affected implication of various factors that significantly influence Nova Scotian youth, including the lack of accommodation, language barriers, nutritional issues, difficulties in community integration, resources limitation, and challenges in finding employment. These factors collectively shape the experience and prospect of Nova Scotian youth, calling for a comprehensive understanding and concerned effort to address these challenges to pave the way for a brighter future for the province's youth generation. The lack of accommodation. The lack of affordable and suitable accommodation can create housing instability and homelessness among youth. It can lead to increased stress and anxiety, impacting their mental health and overall stability. It may also result in youth being unable to complete their education. Language barrier is another impact that affects the youth, especially newcomers in the province like immigrants. They find it difficult to communicate with other children because most youth who don't speak English as their first language can find difficulties in ability to communicate, access to education and healthcare services, and find employment. This can lead to social isolation and may limit their integration into the community. Lack of resources. A shortage of resources can affect youth in various ways. Insufficient access to education, resources, mental health services, and recreational activities can limit their personal and academic growth. A lack of resources may also hinder opportunity for skills development and personal advancement. The social workers who work with French communities, families, and in CSWP school face a lot of challenges due to the lack of resources in French that could guide them to serve the needs of people with whom they work with. Difficulties in integrating into the community, especially immigrants, youth, face challenges in integrating into the community. Some feel isolated or excluded. Social exclusion can have negative effects on mental health and well-being, potentially leading to the feeling of alienation and disconnection. This is relatively related to limited resources, funds, and organization to welcome these people. The problem of nutrition. The economic instability faced by families affect youth because most parents are unable to afford food for their children. Moreover, we find out that more youth students comes to school without feeding well, inadequate access to healthy food because parents don't have enough funds. All these problems in nutrition hinders youth in a physical issue. Difficulties in finding a job. Youth facing unemployment or job insecurity may need to prioritize work over education to support themselves or their families financially. To address these challenges, policymakers, communities, and organizations in Nova Scotia need to work together to provide affordable houses, language support, access to nutritional food, community integrational program, increased resources for youth, and employment opportunities. By addressing these factors, Nova Scotians can better support the well-being and development of their youth population. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of that. It's all things that we can work on, absolutely. And I just want to mention Schools Plus is a great program in the schools that I know is underrated and underutilized. The YWCA has worked really closely with them. So if you aren't familiar with a lot of their work, be sure to check it out. It's really great. So that leads us to the end of our adult panelists. Thank you so much for your contributions. We're actually going to take a quick 5-minute break. During that time, you'll be able to see the amazing graphics that our wonderful facilitator has drawn for us on the Zoom screen and on our projector. But we'll be back in 5 minutes to have a floor discussion between our youth and adults, and then we'll open it up for questions from our audience. We'll see you in 5 minutes. All right, so we're going to come back together. Now, this is an opportunity for the youth to ask the adults questions, put them on the spot. So I don't know how you folks want to do this, but is there anyone that has a question right off the top of your head that it's burning that you'd like to ask any of our panel, any of our adults?
I do.
Great, go ahead.
Mainly, what resources do we have readily available for queer youth, especially in small communities like Lunenburg, up here in Shelburne, where there's really not much access to anything? How can these resources be accessed? Where are they available, and who provides them, as well as who can or how can we create more awareness about these resources?
I can speak to that a little bit, Graham, and then I welcome anyone else who wants to speak to that too. So I'll start by saying that the Youth Project offers a hybrid approach to all of our programs. And so while we do have anchor locations in Sydney and Halifax, we also offer all of our programs that are core programs digitally as well. So there's also always the potential of joining online. And that's also a great piece that we learned through the context of COVID as an accessibility measure as well. So folks can join from the comfort of their homes or from their beds, or can call in if they have an unsupportive household and they aren't able to access or attend programs. They can call in and use the chat option if they don't have access to privacy within their home space. So that's one piece. The other piece is that the Youth Project offers a provincial approach to working with school-aged children. So we travel across the province to different schools, and we have the privilege of working with a bunch of youth through that context, which feels very, very exciting. And we try to bring youth together with support of the Department of Education at many GSA conferences through the year. So connecting youth that way. And we are in the process of revamping our kind of like library-based program that shows up in a variety of libraries that are interested across the province, and can be a great alternative for spaces that don't have an active Youth Project home base. So for example, like a local library could promote a program, have staff trained by the Youth Project, and then have access to supports to access like food budget, often a craft budget, arts budget, for folks that want to attend those spaces. And then there's also a bunch of ways that we're trying to, I think, further the network of collaboration and communication across the province, because there definitely are incredible community leaders in a lot of spaces that are actively underserviced within the province. And so as an organization, we're always trying to find ways to create those connections and to create kind of like mental and also visual kind of map of potential resources. We do have resources listed on our website, but for folks that have any questions, I'm happy to speak like specifically about region specific resources if you might have them, if you want to talk to me via the chat, or if you want to send me an email and ask about your region specifically, I would be happy to provide specific supports for you.
And just to clarify, so you said that sometimes libraries can be a place. So potentially someone could reach out to their library to see if maybe their library wanted to partner with the Youth Project. And the link to the Youth Project is in the chat as well.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any other questions from our youth? Go ahead.
All right, I had a question for you, Hannah. So obviously both of us talked a lot about our personal experience of, facing microaggressions, but I know you work as a social worker. So if you were, I feel like we touched about this a little bit in the speech part, but how would you go about connecting with a minoritized youth you were working with in the context of a social worker and maybe someone who was in a difficult or underprivileged situation already and had other layers of prejudice stacked on top of that, Yeah, how would you go about catching yourself on your own prejudices and making sure you were giving them a very safe environment and a feeling of belonging?
Ask me the tough questions, right? Okay. Good question. It's very, I think it's inspiring to see youth that care so much about others. It's not just about yourself, right? You're advocating for others as well, and others in a sense of building that equity for all, right? I think you just be curious. That's the first part, and it depends on how the youth comes to you. I work in the faith-based community, so a lot of my referrals may come from within the community, or I collaborate with other agencies who know about me. It's a fairly new program. I'm still getting my name out there as a resource or someone to consult with. So it depends on how the youth has come, right? So that's number one. And of course, using all the social work skills and using code of ethics and really unpacking what it is that the youth is identifying that is a problem and working with them, hearing their story, really being present for the story, putting my own beliefs. And there's always implicit bias, right? We all have it, but it's really about being culturally sensitive and, as I said before, curious and passionate about helping. Because one of my core values is being of purpose and help to others. So I don't know if that answers your question, because it's going to be unique to each individual. I'm not going to blanket that, this is how I would do it for, everyone. I think it's just really about individualizing that person and hearing what they need.
That answers it perfectly. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I love the burning tough questions. Any other questions from our youth?
So I kind of had a question around mental health, because that's what I was doing. So I kind of touched on social norms and stigma, and you touched on kind of feeling like belonging. And I touched on like how the stigma can be perpetuated through the lack of education. I'm kind of curious on what you feel we as a society are doing to keep perpetuating that stigma, and kind of what we could do to try and help solve that perpetuation of the stigma, because it's a big question. It's a big problem, but I'm kind of curious of what your professional general opinion is on what we're doing to perpetuate it and how we can maybe perpetuate it less, because it's always going to be there. That's kind of what stigma is. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. That's not too loud, is it? Yeah. So so how to negate perpetrating the stigma that was created before to move forward? I think one of the main things that comes up is being persistent and being assertive with this kind of stuff, because from our work with some of the schools, I think both families and staff are pretty intimidated when it comes to mental health. And I will say, working with some of teachers that have provided collateral with students, they just don't have the education, they don't have the capacity. And when sometimes it's like the chicken and the egg, right? They're still struggling for funds just to get chalk in their classrooms if they'll still use sports. So mental health, literacy is quite at the bottom. But I think that mental health, like physical health, is in all types of settings. And I think now that we have a little bit more awareness of it and insight into it, I think we're getting to points of society where it is neglectful just to dismiss it, right? And some of the barriers that we face through the systemic challenges is people ending up in places because that maybe they shouldn't be because somebody wasn't able to support them at the point in time, right? And a big aspect of it, their lost opportunities, particularly with youth. And in one aspect, I think the advocacy, not only from the youth, but from the parents and as well as from the teachers has that as well, because I think, in Nova Scotia, where there's a growing population, particularly working at the IWK, where we get a lot of consults from different places, where the IWK gets very much seen as like, you have all of the knowledge and the magic wand, and sometimes it takes a kid out of their own environment, and we're not able to support them back into that, as opposed to, for example, if the individual had the capacity and comfort to open up that conversation, that could create more opportunity to see, can I help you right now? Or what is it that I'm missing to help you at that? Because one of the biggest unfortunate outcomes of these situations is that, youth feel invalidated and, they're missed opportunities, because if I reach out to a teacher or a counselor and I'm just looking to talk this problem through, and then I'm like, again, that fixed mentality, it's the, something's wrong, let's fix it, as opposed to listening and talking about it. It's really like, again, I feel stigmatizing, and also kind of leaving mental illness to those closed off settings, when we know everybody lives with mental illness and can in the community at that. And to think that it is kind of insulting, right, for kids, and particularly when we know that kids can be such good communicators of their feelings. And it's so unfortunate that sometimes you need to have these the conversations under like the worst settings for that. So I would say advocacy, sorry, that was one of my big long tangents, but advocacy from you guys, the youth, I will say, you see stuff that we don't. We're conditioned at this point in our minds to go through everyday work. And, whenever my first goal, whenever I'm sitting down with a kid and doing an assessment, is I want to understand, where are you coming from? Because it doesn't matter what I'm going to say or what I'm going to put after if I don't really see the situation as you're seeing it. And as a first step, I feel like that's something that we could all be better at, and it's just listening, not moving. And again, all of us as like professionals or caretakers, we move into, I want to fix, or I want to put something in there. And, and we like to paternalize and put our opinion in it. And sometimes it's, like seeing, what are we trying to fix? If I don't even understand the kiddo's situation, like, why am I going to respond to a 5-minute conversation at that? But that's the end of the tangent. Hopefully you got something out of that. Thanks, Luther.
I think tangents lead to the best answers. So, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, there was a question that came through the chat that I think is maybe a perfect follow-up to this question. And the question is, what should kids do? Sometimes kids are the first responders. So sometimes when a child is maybe feeling worthless, having struggles, maybe feels like life isn't worth living, sometimes they tell their friends before they tell anyone else. And sometimes they tell their friends not to tell anyone. What would you say we should be thinking about, not only in terms of counselors or teachers, but society more broadly? And what do you want our elected leaders to be thinking about when we think about kids? What should they do? And then what should we be doing collectively?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, so from one aspect, if we're talking about the belonging aspect, and I will say this, kids in general and youth feel more comfortable with their friends, but when it comes to like really serious stuff, sometimes the parents are not the best to talk about them, just like topics of puberty or sexuality, where they're looking for somebody that's going through the situation to be able to better understand in their current tenses. Because, I'm a little aged out of high school at this point, but situations are very different and circumstances are different. So we may not be able to provide the best help. So number one, it may not, if they are reaching out to their friends, it's good because somebody is in communication. The only caveat I will say to that would be if somebody communicates a safety risk at that, and just food for thought for everyone, because I think that those people that support their friends and are listening are the first ones that want to provide the help, and sometimes the help that is asked is not maybe the most realistic and can put kids in a very difficult situation in terms of like, I'm concerned for my friend and they told me not to tell anyone and this. And, you know, like, for example, the youth project is a great resource at that, right? Because, for example, you know, it may not be your parent, but all you need is just a trusted adult, right? And that's specifically when it comes to the safety aspect, right? When somebody talking about like hurting themselves at that, and, you know, and in some regards, it can also help for kids to talk about this with either older siblings or that one trusted family member, just to get insight and see, you know, is there something else that I should be doing different? Because the youth and the social circle is great support, and it can help the individual feel that sense of belonging. But on the long term too, we all cap out at a certain capacity too, and those are also situations in which, you know, sometimes we encourage like including them in safety planning at that, right? If I know that when you get really upset, you're not going to reach out to your parent, but you reach out to Bobby, I want you to reach out to Bobby if that's the case, right? As long as we have somebody that can look after the situation. And, you know, and I'll say this again, I know I keep bringing that bill from New Brunswick back, but if your kids don't want to tell you something, there's a good reason for it. And if they don't feel that amount of trust, you know, aside from like just, you know, embarrassing things that kids don't want to talk about too much, there's the aspect of, you know, I think is individuals and role models to the youth today. You know, if you want to create that relationship, you want to create that connection, and being intrusive and putting my own thoughts between it can actually impair that. Because what can happen if we go on the other spectrum, for example, and there is no safety risk involved, and, you know, Cindy tells me the secret and I go to Cindy's mom and I'm like, guess what? And then her mom just maybe is not the most sensitive person with this stuff, and then now Cindy feels like, wow, I can't trust anyone. And that is a concern for me, because now if you are going to do something harmful, I don't have the assurance that you may actually be making a connection with someone.
To that, if I may add on to that, going a bit bigger, because I heard elected officials are going to be watching this. I think it goes back to what you said, Luther. There's not enough education in the schools about mental health. We have to take away the stigma. And because, you know, what is it, 90% of youth's time is spent in schools. That's the place. So really opening up those conversations in classrooms. I know it's scary. People get, oh, they're going to talk about people dying and killing themselves, but it actually removes that feeling. Sometimes they just want to talk, they just want to get it out. And if there's that opportunity in school to provide, you know, this term that we keep using, safe space, but if it really truly is a safe space and they're willing to go into these deeper conversations and do that hard work. It's hard, it's not easy. Not every adult wants to have this, but it's really needed. We need it in schools. We need to have more mental health education for our young people. And, you know, it's unfortunate that the suicide rate is so high. And we've got to do something. You know, we can't keep brushing it aside. So I just wanted to add that piece. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And Carmel, I think you had your hand up if you wanted to still add something.
Yeah, I really appreciate everything that folks have shared so far. I think that there is a necessity for mental health resources that are culturally relevant and comprehensive in a wide variety of directions. And I think there's a lot of pieces that are really important. If a young person isn't telling a trusted adult in their life and is leaning on friends, it's really important that there are a lot of different options for then a young person to say, hey, I can't hold all of this myself, but I know and I trust this resource and it's available. And I've called them before and I know that they're not going to misgender you, or I know that the cops are not going to show up if it's a mental health crisis. I know that these things are true and I can promise those things to you. And I think that if those realities existed, if there was, like, for example, a mobile crisis unit that existed that was led by like community trained organizations that could have a huge impact on young people locally, and also in rural locations where there's less access to ready resource. So that feels really important to name, that there's an active lack of structural support. And then also, of course, there are a lot of organizations that have a peer-based approach to support. So that was already touched on, but it really shows and demonstrates the necessity of these spaces. If a young person is told, or a young person discloses to another young person, that young person can then say, well, if you don't want to talk to a guardian or a parent, here are some really amazing adults that you can build supportive relationships with that can assist you in navigating building a safety plan, or connecting you to other youth so you feel less isolation. So really allowing for young people to have access to choice is really important, and have access to choice around what kind of resources that they would like to use is critical. In my experience, the lack of access to choice is a huge deterrent from accessing resources at all. When young people feel like there's only one option and that option doesn't fit them, it's very unlikely that they will reach out to access support, right? So a plethora of options is ideal and needed. And again, making sure that young people are aware of the resources that are around them that they can refer their friends to is also really crucial and really important. So they're not holding the weight of mental health crises as the only person in a responsive role.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's a great segue into opening up the floor for questions from our audience, both virtually and in person. We have the wonderful Hannah that's going to have a mic for folks that would like to ask a question. And I'm hoping, Naj, online, you're able to have the chat. Perfect. So we already have a question here in person. So go ahead.
So I don't know if this is a question so much as it is an invitation to speak on something that I find really it would be really beneficial for me to hear about. So I'm a teacher. I work with grade 7 and 8. So those are kids from about age 11 through 13-ish, 14. So it depends on when their birthdays fall. And a lot of you have talked about the need to have these safe, supportive adults. And I think the big question that a lot of us have as teachers is, we want to be safe, supportive adults. We want to be able to have kids come to us and see us as safe people. And so I think I'm mainly addressing the young people on this, the youths are on this panel, but I'll put it out to everybody. And I know, Zofia, this is something that you've kind of, ranted about. I'm just gonna say ranted, but talked about before. But what message would you give to teachers especially, but anybody who works with young people? How can we demonstrate that we would like to be someone that they can trust? Because we can say it all we like, but simply saying, I am a safe adult, gets you absolutely nowhere. I would say it sets you back. Do you have any thoughts on how we can be vulnerable in a way that sort of shows that we might be a safe person to approach if they need something?
Do you want me to find the notes about what I said to your master's class this summer? I still have them on my phone.
I wasn't thinking of the conversation you had when you came to class with me, but if you remember, I think that was what was kind of on my mind, but I'm sort of putting it out to you and to everybody.
I need to find the notes, but I think somebody else should answer that too.
We have Graham that has their hand up online as well that would like to answer.
I think primarily just showing that you're willing to learn and receptive to needs and wants and inquiries from your students.
So, I found the, oh, sorry, you go ahead,
okay.
Luther.
So as a general example, I'm gonna go with, say we have parents. We have two parents, right? And they have a child who is queer in some way. We don't know. That child, you can't make them feel like you're a safe space. But what you can do is you can open the option for a safe space and let them come to you. And the reason I say this is because you can't make them ever feel like it's a safe space, but you can open up the option for them to feel like it's a safe space. So, you know, from my personal experience, it's been a while since I've been in grade 7. I'm grade 12 now. But in my mind, what teachers can do, and the only thing teachers can really do, is just have that space feel like it could be a safe space. So books that are around different subjects that are maybe sensitive, or maybe that people can feel are sensitive, maybe lessons that revolve around some of those things, because we can never make people feel like we can't force them into a safe space, but we can most certainly give them the option to make it their safe space. So I don't think there's one answer. I think it's just making that environment and making that, making it open to them. I mean, I know that's a pretty generic answer, but.
Okay, I know you already know this because you read through my notes. Yeah, but what I've said, and I've talked with my mom, who's obviously an amazing teacher, about this a lot. But what I think is vital for educators and really anyone who is working with children, and especially minoritized youth, is to be angry. And that doesn't make a lot of sense right off the bat, but there's a lot of really, really horrible stuff kids are facing globally, but also potentially in their own families, in their own lives. So you as a supporting adult need to be upset about that and show them that you're angry for them, you're angry with them, and that more than a safe space, it needs to be a space where they can show that they are just as angry, that this is hurtful, that prejudice they might personally be experiencing, the global issues, not even of prejudice, but environmentalism. Make it a space where they can be upset. I feel like a lot of the time we say safe space and we want it to be very welcoming and kind and pastel palettes everywhere, which is important. Make sure that they feel comfortable, they feel happy. But what people need, and what we don't get enough of in our society, is this openness to be angry. And I think that's really, really vital.
I always like to add a little piece to this. Working in a school setting for the last 6 years and providing professional development to teachers, the number one thing I tell them when PD days start at the end of summer, I'm like, build the relationship. Forget about the academics. And even for everyone on this call and watching, think to yourself of that one teacher in your life and how they impacted you. I'm sure it's not that geometry lesson or the algebra or the novel. It was how they made you feel. So the relationship is the key. If you build a relationship with your students, they will open up to you. I'm also an advocate for restorative practices. I say do circles in the classroom. Doesn't matter if they're grade 10. That's your space. That's your space if you've built a relationship. Listen to them. Take 5 minutes out of your curriculum to just build that time knowing your students and who they are.
Are there any questions online so far as well?
None have arrived, but thank you so much for those amazing comments, and especially giving permission for anger. That safe space is about validating some of the uncomfortable feelings, not just the pastel. That was brilliant.
Do we have any questions here from anyone else? Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to sort of touch, I guess you'll be using the mic. I just wanted to touch in about what you said in, personally, what I was originally thinking before you finished the speech is that really, I'm just thinking what I was going to say.
Think about it before you talk on the mic.
That, well, really, it's really good for personally kids to have support from adults, but also sometimes kids should really, as a kid, solve problems by themselves and with other friends. But that doesn't really make sense now that you finish your spiel. So yeah.
Talking resilience, right? And that's what you want. Any last questions?
We have some comments in the chat. First of all, that did make sense. So don't say that that doesn't make sense. What you said made a lot of sense. It is about learning to have faith in yourself and learning how to figure things out and knowing that there are safe adults around. And then there's some wonderful comments about having adults share feelings, even like crying. And the truth is, this world is a really scary place, and every adult should be joining with kids and being upset about the world we're leaving them, and joining with kids about what can we do to make it better. So there's a lot of comments online about just the importance of adults sharing their vulnerabilities and imperfections, and that models safety by showing that we're all human and figuring it out together.
That's great. Any last questions or comments from anybody before we wrap up? Sure, go right ahead.
Promise, I'll keep it short. Yeah, no, I mean, to the parents showing vulnerability is one of the lines that always sticks with me, and I talk particularly when you have that like prime teen who's really rubbing heads with the parents, and it's nobody teaches you how to be a youth or a child, and nobody teaches you how to be a parent either. And I think that most families struggle during that period of time, and it can be really difficult. And from my own personal experience, I think seeing my parents as humans at that and trying their best really helped me understand, develop a little bit of empathy, at least, where I could approach the situation and see, they're still not right, but maybe we could have a better talk that doesn't just include arguing. But yeah, particularly for youth, where we very much tend to see the parents just identify themselves with, I am the authority figure, right? I'm supposed to be a parent, and in between this, sometimes we forget that this isn't just a person. Like, this is your child, and you guys have that bonding connection. And I think we get very lost in between, like the teenage years and the parent years at that. And there's a lot of talk in here as well, right? In terms of, let's get the parents to show the kids what, like a lot of feedback for the parents at that. And maybe it's necessary though sometimes, but for kids, we can always see things a little bit different to give them a slack sometimes. Parents work and they have rough days too, and they care about you, and sometimes that can help switch the attitude as well, because I think sometimes, like, when parents are very like rigid about something and we're not coming to terms, sometimes you, like the youth, being the role models and showing that we're not so heels down, lets them back up a little bit at that.
There was one comment just in the chat about the importance to recognize that in addition to parents, we have a lot of kids who are being raised by other guardians, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and to recognize that the notion of who's raising our kids, it's a whole village, and that's why we're so grateful for this conversation, because we're all part of this together.
I love that. It does take a village for sure. Well, I think that wraps up today. Thank you so much to our youth and adult panelists. I think this was such an important conversation, especially on National Day of the Child. I hope these conversations continue. This makes me feel better for the future with amazing youth leaders like yourselves that were here today. and the work that's already being done even by our adults as mentors. I feel like as someone who's quote unquote an adult for myself, I still feel like a youth sometimes. I feel like even for me, I could learn a lot from you. So both the youth and the adults. So this was great. And thank you so much to our participants who joined us online and in person for some really thought-provoking questions. And it was a pleasure to moderate today. So thank you very much.